computer. There we go. Okay, I do have some dot points. There we go. So welcome to this edition of Yenn Purkis podcast show. It's lovely to have you joining us today. Today I've got a good friend of mine and frequent co-author of mine, Dr Emma Goodall, who's very kindly agreed to come on our show. So welcome, Emma.
Thanks for inviting me, Yenn. It's really good to catch up with you. I haven't caught up with you in a little while, so it's great to see you even in cyberspace. And yeah, looking forward to talking.
Absolutely, likewise. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
That's always so hard for me. I usually go, "Hi, I'm Emma." So I'm an autistic adult. I am a researcher. I research autism and what it's like for autistics. And I also work for a national not-for-profit in autism education. And I run an autism consultancy that I do life coaching for adult autistics, and I do interoception coaching through. And I live in Adelaide with my lovely little dog.
Oh, your little dog is beautiful.
So, but I guess one of the things that we'll talk about is that I was widowed this year. So I had a wonderful wife, Dr. Jane Nugent, that Yenn and I wrote a book with, and she died in April this year. So that has been a massive impact as someone on the spectrum to have such a big change. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you wrote a book, which I've got and have read, and it requires tissues, but it's a wonderful book, and it's called Lessons from a Good Death. So do you tell us why you wrote the book?
Yeah, I can. So I'll show people what it looks like if they want to see it. That's obviously back to front probably, but that's the book, and it's just got lots of pictures and writing in it. So all the pictures are photographs that I took that were, apart from wedding photographs of Jane and I, and they are things that were meaningful to me or meaningful to Jane or meaningful to both of us. And the reason I wrote this book was that I couldn't process Jane's death very well. I couldn't, I was very stuck and lost, and I didn't know what to do. And as Yenn says, I frequently write with them. And I found that writing was one of my outlets. So I have a blog. I blog at healthypossibilities.net. And I changed my blog from being a blog focused on autism and autistics to being a blog about my grief and my grief journey. And people kept telling me, you should make this into a book. And I thought, well, that's all well and good, but actually Jane was a remarkable woman. So Jane had very significant ADHD, so she was neurodivergent as well. And she was a great ally to the autistic and autism communities. And I wanted to share some of the wisdom that she shared with me through her life that helped me to grow and be the person that I am today. And so what I did is I interspersed each of my blog posts with a story from or about Jane or something that she had shared with me. And yes, it does require tissues. It is very emotional in places, but I think it also, there are some good laughs in it as well.
Thank you. We don't actually talk much about grief and loss as a culture, particularly in the Western English-speaking world. I do remember watching a program on antiques, and they were talking about the Victorian practice of making hair jewellery from people that were lost. And the journalist said the Victorians didn't do sex well at all, but they did death very well. And we do sex quite well as a culture, but we don't do death well. And that sort of stuck with me because I think it's probably true. So do you think as a society we need to be more open and more willing to talk about these topics?
Absolutely, we do. I think one of the reasons I wrote the book was in the hope that when somebody's friend loses a loved one, that they have a gift they can give that says, I'm here for you, I just don't know how to be here for you. Because one of the things that really struck me was how many people love and care about either Jane and or I, but didn't know what to do or say. And instead of saying, I don't know what to do or say, some of them just stopped being in contact. Some were absolutely amazing, and they tended to come from cultures where death is dealt with very differently. And if we don't talk about death and grief and loss, people assume that the very old Western models of grief and loss are accurate, and that you go through these particular stages in this particular order and then fixed. And it's not like that at all. We all grieve differently, and that's one of the things that I do talk about in the book, because when Jane lost her mum, she grieved in such a deep, intense way for 5 years. And I have grieved very, very differently. And I think that it's important that everybody understands there is no right or wrong way to grieve, that loss is different for different people, and that you might think you're tracking along okay and then just be blindsided by another rolling wave of grief, and that's okay. You're not going crazy. It's just a very, very strange journey, and one that, if you're neurodivergent, I think is different again to if you're not, because there are added complications. You may not be able to express what you're feeling. You may not know what you're feeling. You may I keep telling people I'm lost, and they go, no, you're dealing with it so well. And I'm like, no, I'm really lost. I have no idea where I'm going. Yes, I'm working. Yes, I'm functioning. But that doesn't mean that I'm not completely lost. And I found it very helpful. I'm Buddhist. I found it very helpful to keep going back to my beliefs. And I have family who are Maori in New Zealand, and I found it very helpful to take them up on their offer to call any time of day or night and just be. So very early on, I would just cry on the phone. I'd howl loudly in a very un-Western way. It was very cathartic, and I needed to do it. And I think it's just so important that we can access the support from loved ones and help them through something like this book, help people to feel comfortable offering that support, to just say it's okay for you to phone and cry, and I won't do anything. I'm just on the other end of the phone letting you know I love you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. And I think yeah, we all grieve differently, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's something we go through the way we go through. I actually got an award about this time last year, and when I got the award, I was a patient in the psych ward, and I accepted my award, and I gave a speech based on the concept of it's okay to not be okay, which in that situation went off really well. But it was very true for me, and I think that's a really important concept, that it is actually okay to not be okay, and it's okay to be with someone who isn't okay. You don't have to fix it. So do you have any thoughts around that?
I do. I think that one of the decisions I made very, very early on after Jane died, probably actually minutes after, which sounds ridiculous, but was that I'm not going to do this by myself. I can't do this by myself, and it's okay to ask for help. And for people that know me, that's not something I have been used to doing. It's not my default personality, but it really is okay to not be okay, and it's really okay to be open about that and to say I'm not okay. So for example, for work, I said I didn't want to stop working because that would be worse for me. What would I do but sit at home and get very, very distressed? Whereas at least if I was working from home, I had a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And I've had days where I'm actually not okay, and I've been able to say to my boss, look, I really need to take a mental health day or half day today. I'm not tracking well today. And through being open about not being okay, you're able to just sit with that and move through it. And if people are willing to just be there for you and not try and fix it, because it's not fixable, like nothing is going to bring my wife back, she's dead, and I just have to learn to live with that, and you can't fix that. So if people try and fix it, sometimes it makes it worse. But if they're just willing to just be with you and let you be not okay, and know that one day you will feel differently than this minute. And that's the thing about not being okay. You get stuck in not being okay as well. And it's really hard to see that it's going to be different in a week. And it might be not okay again, but you're going to go through that cycle. You're not going to be not okay forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, thank you. So what things have helped you this year?
Oh my goodness, the kindness of others. Seriously, that is the biggest thing. I had a lovely friend who was a colleague previously, and she brought me a week's supply of home cooked meals every week for about 6 weeks. And if she hadn't, I wouldn't have eaten. My parents, who fed me and talked about Jane with me and shared funny stories about her and laughed, and people who sent me messages to say how much Jane had meant to them. All those things were really beautiful and helpful, even if sometimes they may be very sad. But the people that kept in contact after that initial period of 6 weeks, that was the most helpful. So the lady that cooked me food, once I said to her, I need to start cooking for myself, she still kept coming to visit. And I think the hardest thing, and I know you didn't ask this, but the hardest thing was the people that wouldn't come once lockdown was finished because Jane wasn't here anymore, and they felt uncomfortable in our home. And I found that heartbreaking because I'm still here and I'm still alive. And I know how to handle that because their grief is real. I understand it's uncomfortable. But instead of saying, why don't you come to see us, or why don't we meet at the park or something, they just wouldn't come, except for an autistic friend who I actually asked, is that why you don't want to come? And he said, yes. And we talked about it. And I explained I needed him to. And he did. He was willing to be kind and make that uncomfortable first step because it was so, I needed it so much. And I think, again, that's that thing of being okay, saying I'm not okay and this is what I need for you to help me.
It requires a fair amount of assertiveness as well, and boundary setting, and being able to actually say that to people, which is quite commendable, really, and can be quite challenging, I think, especially when you're going through grief.
It can be quite challenging, but I think I made a weird kind of really conscious decision, probably in the days following Jane's death, that I was not the only person grieving, and everybody had the right to their grief journey. And I think this is where Autistic is very helpful, because I can understand that everybody's grief journey is different, and it is what it is. There's no value judgment attached to that.
Yeah.
So that meant I was willing to share and walk alongside and have people walk alongside me that normally I wouldn't. And I was surprised by how big some people's hearts are that I hadn't known about before.
Have you got advice that you'd give to other people who might be experiencing grief and loss?
You be kind to yourself, drink lots of water. That sounds crazy, but grief and loss is excruciatingly painful, physically painful, and often headaches and sore throats are a part of that. And a lot of that actually just comes down to dehydration, and because you're in the midst of the grief and loss, you don't have the interoceptive awareness of that. And so you let it go. That was a really helpful tip from a colleague, and it was the most helpful tip actually. But the second one is be kind to yourself and allow yourself moments of joy. So I walk my dog every day, and when I would walk my dog, I would play music because that helped me to move, to walk. And I particularly love nature, and I allowed myself the moment of joy when there was a flower that hadn't been there before, or a butterfly, or a bird was singing. Because sometimes we feel that we shouldn't have any joy when we're in that deep grief, but all emotions have flip sides, and we can't actually be in one forever. So be kind to yourself. Yeah, allow yourself those moments of joy. And if you have a friend or a loved one who's grieving, let them be not okay, but also let them have those moments of joy, and don't judge. I wrote about this in the book, that somebody seemed to be really judging me for not grieving in the way they thought I should be grieving. And I found that very, very hurtful, because they don't see the behind closed doors me.
Yeah.
But also, Jane, like most people who love someone, when they think that they might die younger than they should, want the person they love to have a life after they die. And she wanted me to keep living. She didn't want me to grieve for 5 years like she did.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude?
I think there's a little bit at the end of the book which talks about things you should do before you die. And it sounds crazy, but I can't stress enough, if you don't have a will, go make one. It's been a nightmare even with Jane having a will. Make sure that you know the passwords of your loved ones' email accounts, that you know how to cancel direct debits for them, etc., etc., because there are so many practical things to do when somebody dies, and if you haven't planned it beforehand, it can just be awful. And use however you choose to say goodbye to them, whether it's a funeral, a service, a party, whatever, use it to do what you need to do. It's not about anybody else. They judge you, that's fine. It's about you, and you having a way to say goodbye for now, or goodbye in the way that helps your heart to move and to keep living, so that you're not stuck without being able to step forward a little bit, because it's a weird step forward. It's kind of like a circular motion. You almost go back to the beginning, but not quite, and then forward and back again. And anything that helps you to keep moving forward that doesn't hurt others is you need to do.
Thank you so much, Emma. That is such a meaningful and heartfelt and extremely helpful discussion. So thank you so much for being so open and, allowing us to take on your wisdom and knowledge. And I would recommend people buy the book. It's an excellent book. I read it in one go. There were tissues. And yeah, big thank you, Emma. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Yenn, and thank you so much for asking me to talk about such a difficult topic that many people find really uncomfortable, because it's really important. So thank you.
Thank you.